So we don't have a lot of time, so I will keep it short. I will start straight with the questions without introducing at once the panelists. So maybe if you want to ask them more questions about them, you can find them later and have a Q&A with them. I will start with you, Alan. So as we were talking before, now there is this kind of buzzword of the Silicon Valley everywhere, the Silicon something, the Silicon Alps, the Silicon France. So, but do you think it does always make sense to imitate the American model? Or every place is different?
Sure. So for context, my name is Alan Taylor. I work for Endeavor, which is a global organization that helps high-impact entrepreneurs. We have a presence here in Turkey, but I actually run the office in Silicon Valley. And so over the last 10 years, I have seen all kinds of examples of Silicon Oasis and Silicon Roundabout and this sort of valley. And the Mexicans even have one called Tequila Valley. So there really are lots of examples. I think the goal in the end, though, should not be to copy or replicate Silicon Valley, but rather to find elements of the culture, pieces of what works and what makes Silicon Valley so unique that can be recreated in a local context in different places around the world. And we can talk about some of those if you want. But for me, that's really the goal, I think.
Yeah, OK. Andy, what do you think can be these preconditions to have a startup, a flourishing startup ecosystem in place?
Sure. OK, well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Andy Tsao. I'm a managing director with Silicon Valley Bank. I've been on the international expansion side of the bank for the last 10, 12 years. And currently, we're looking at new markets like Turkey that we find really strategically interesting because of all the innovation happening here. So, in terms of preconditions, I think some of the speakers today did a great job in terms of talking about some of the secular changes that are happening in our industry that are allowing innovation to really globalize. The cost of startups has dropped dramatically, so the sort of cost of entry to start a business is at an all-time low. At the same time, again, talking about the number of smartphones people have, and particularly in the emerging markets where you have so much underlying growth. So, I think there is today more factors at play that can allow you to build a tech ecosystem. That being said, from our view, I think we still look at scale of the opportunity. Mm-hmm. In the U.S., we have 28 offices across the U.S., and a lot of that is a function of how much entrepreneurship is happening on one hand, and how much risk capital is available. And those two things really help us screen what ecosystems are that we would prioritize.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Sertac, you were telling me before you are helping private companies to gain financial support. So can you tell us what exactly do you do in this respect?
Yes, so Turkey is a fast-growing country. There are many SMEs, and as a person who is working for SMEs for the last 18 years, we experienced that as Borsa Istanbul, we saw that to gain fund, to reach the fund, to access to finance is very difficult by realizing IPOs. Because IPO is the core business of exchanges, but it's really very difficult not only in Turkey, but in all over the world. So we saw that especially for emerging countries, the companies, startups, SMEs, and the big ones, all of them, should have some short ways to reach to finance. So as Borsa Istanbul, we put a solution to this problem and established private market. It's, of course, the investor side for Turkey is not very familiar with this kind of in the beginning, but as we established last year, it became more common, and it's not only for Turkish investors, but also for foreign investors, for foreign startups and all local startups. We are operating it. And in this ecosystem, it's so big that, it's so large that there are many, many transactions in Turkey, and the total 76% of total acquisition transactions are below $50 million. So it's just a startup country, we can say.
Quite a lot. Yeah.
And in this marketplace, of course, the position for startups, for startup ecosystem is the most important is that the visibility is very important because if you have an emerging country, you have thousands or millions of startups and they're spread for an expanded area.
Yeah,
so to find the right one, to pick up the right one, to invest to the right startup is very difficult. So we are easing it for investors.
Okay. Yeah, we'll come also to that. In terms of incentives to attract talents, now there is a kind of race to attract the best talents from everywhere. London is promoting its own kind of visa, and some countries like Italy or the Netherlands have also their own programs. So aside from the financial incentives, what do you think, Alan, are the factors that could be worthwhile improving to attract talents?
I think there's a couple factors that are really most important, and I would probably focus on things that are a little more on the soft side, right? So not hardcore programs around visas or money, but for me, where people are able to successfully attract the talent to build world-class companies has everything to do with people. And so for that, I think you need a culture of trust and openness, a culture of mentorship, a culture of helping, a culture of cooperating and sharing, not only between startups, but between investors and startups. And that is a really unique thing to Silicon Valley, right? That sometimes it's hard to explain or translate when you work in other places around the world that, no, like investors and entrepreneurs can actually be friends and, you know, they hang out together and that's okay, right? And entrepreneurs share ideas openly with other entrepreneurs. That is a really unique element of the culture that I think has been recreated to some degree in Berlin and in London and in some of these other places around the world. And I think that's a really important incentive to attracting people to want to build companies there and work there.
Of course, also the quality of life is important, you know?
Well, yeah, life is bigger than just building your startup. You also want to do it in a place you'd like to live, right? I mean, it's one of the main reasons we've seen with Endeavor great examples in the last few years of entrepreneurs or individuals who grew up in Turkey, who live in Silicon Valley or London or New York or somewhere, actually coming back and building a company here. Well, part of the reason is they want to live here, right? So I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, of course. On the other hand, you also have to gain access to capitals because, as Steve Blank was saying before, entrepreneurship without this capital is one-hand clapping, no?
Right.
So I think you're the best fit to explain to the audience about how startups could really get access to credit.
Yeah, I mean,
It's always good to have a banker on your panel.
It's perfect for it's in the center, in fact.
You know, I mean, when you look at, again, contrasting to Silicon Valley, there's more risk capital there, arguably the most developed ecosystem in the world. So it's not a really fair comparison. Again, going back to the question you asked Alan early on, is it right to compare to Silicon Valley all the time? I think I agree with Alan that oftentimes looking at other ecosystems, even in the U.S., you could look at Boston, you could look at Boulder, Colorado, you know, as different markets that might be more comparable to the ecosystem you're trying to develop. But here's where, and we talked a little bit about this before in terms of when you're trying to build a new ecosystem, how do you bring the risk capital to play? And that's not an easy thing to do because there's not an indigenous venture capital community. So there's a very close linkage that we've seen in a lot of new and emerging markets between how government and government-related entities are supporting the ecosystem, whether it's through grant programs, whether it's through funding for the venture capital funds themselves to become a limited partner. You know, I think across Europe and in Turkey, it's very common for the European Investment Fund to be a key limited partner, and I think this is how the capital base typically begins to start. But I think as these ecosystems scale, then I think how much government stays involved it can have a very interesting effect on how the ecosystem develops.
Yeah, you are introducing an interesting point, and I was going to ask to Serta. How do you think the public sector could also play a role in enabling a flourishing ecosystem? What can the government or other public institutions or bodies do?
In Turkey, we have an act for business angels. The Treasury, Turkish Treasury, put the regulation last year, and it has brought very nice tax incentives. And I think the UK and Turkish are the examples that are used abroad for other countries. And in Turkey, more than 300 business angels had this tax initiative up to now. There are many, thousands of business angels, but 300 of them are certified by Treasury. So if you are certified from Treasury, you can take the chance of this tax incentive. And other than that, the SMEs Development Association, Borsa Istanbul, the exchange, the only exchange in Turkey, and the Treasury and the other related institutions take the initiative to support SMEs and startups in Turkey very much. As I said, there are thousands and millions of SMEs in Turkey. And but here the problem is that the number is sometimes not advantage, it is disadvantage, because you must manage it, you must organize it. So look at this nice event. There are hundreds and thousands of startups here, but what's the reason they are here first? I think to be visible more and to make networking for communication, etc. But this nice event will end today, I think. So what will happen tomorrow? This ecosystem needs not regulation, but more relationship management, more networking, more communication. So we put a private market of Borsa Istanbul to solve this problem in essence, to make investors and startups come together every time, 7/24, and make networking, not only networking, but also giving some mentorship, some trainings to them. In Turkey, one of the biggest problems for startups is that many perfect ideas, but they are not commercialized enough. Why? Because they are not presented enough in a better sense to the investors.
Excuse me if I interrupted. This will be the last question, so don't anticipate too much. So, well, of course, public sector intervention can be valuable, but I think probably it could also have some drawbacks. No, it depends on how you do that. If you just throw money in the pool, I think you subscribe more to an American point of view, that public sector should just get out of the way or something like this.
Well, I'll try to be polite in case we have government people in the room. But,
okay,
but yeah, honest, okay. Oftentimes I do think the most productive thing the public sector can do is just get out of the way and let the private sector market work, right? But I recognize that's a very American perspective.
Yeah, what kind of measures do you think the public sector could do? What I think, for instance, cities could also be the best customers, of startups.
Yeah, I mean that certainly. If obviously government does a lot of purchasing, so through procurement, if you really incented government to perhaps do a certain percentage of their spending on buying from startups, that would be a great way to be a customer and help these companies grow in that sense. I think I would agree with Alan and maybe some of our previous speakers. I think where government can sometimes get ahead of itself is around doing a lot of direct selection. So if you're create a government venture capital fund and you're making direct investments, and that oftentimes can lead to mixed results because the expertise may not necessarily be there. But things like reducing bureaucracy and making a level playing field for businesses, those kind of things, I think, would be good for everybody. And government's good at it.
Yeah, Fedek, maybe to clarify, government can help. My fundamental belief, and I think what Endeavor believes, is entrepreneurs can change the world. Investors, really good, smart investors, can help a lot. Great service providers, bankers and lawyers and other folks can also help. And yeah, government can help too, a little bit, right? But it's really about entrepreneurs, right? If you're sitting around waiting for the government to give you all the answers or to build your startup ecosystem, I think you're on the wrong track. I think entrepreneurs are what really can change things.
Okay. Okay, so coming back to what you were saying, sorry if I interrupted you before, but I wanted to ask you instead about the Turkish ecosystem in particular. So you think really Turkey has the chance to become a global, or Istanbul specifically has the chance to become a global hub like London or Berlin? I think.
Yeah, but there is a potential for that, of course. And when you see the potential of the population, the demographic structure, or not only for people, to the companies, of course, and to the resources of the country, of course there is potential. But how you realize, how you make them take the advantage of this, it is important. So yes, the government initiatives are very important. But if you don't make the investors realize about angel investment or startup investment enough, what the advantages of that. If you don't know about that, you put many initiatives, text initiatives or others. No sense. Yeah. No advantage for that. Because if a startup says that, yeah, this is my idea and this is the way I'm producing it. Yeah, if the investor sees it, realizes it, then there is no problem. But how to make them together, how to make them communicate together, how to make them trust if you put a regulated platform into the middle, that if this platform says that the startups here are eligible, we put them through the process of evaluation. And if the platform says that these investors have enough cash to invest to these sectors, if you regulate this with a platform, functioning platform, then this is the solution of this problem. But unfortunately, there is not. Even in the Europe, there is not. So the Capital Markets Union of European Commission tries to solve this problem also in that way, but it's not solved yet. And not only the visibility of the startups, but also the training of them, how to present their idea, how to commercialize it, how to package it. It must be given by any regulator or by any organizer. You cannot wait for the government to do this only. Yeah, it must be organized in a sense in Turkey it's by exchange, by private market, but in other countries it must be organized for some other institutions also.
Andy, what do you think? I think you have been here, you've spoken to some startups, Turkish or from the MENA region. Have you seen some that have the potentiality to become a global player? Do you think there is the maturity for that?
Well, it's certainly one of the reasons why we keep coming back to Turkey. We've been doing business development here for a little over 2 years now, and partnering with Endeavor to really help us sort of figure out the network and the entrepreneurial landscape here. We've been very encouraged at what we've seen. I think it's still reasonably early in the ecosystem here, but even in the short time that we've been calling on Turkey for the last 2.5 years, we've had some really positive exits. Yemek Sepet'e has been brought up a few times this year already today, and Mark Foni, Positron, other really nice examples of companies that have grown to reasonable scale and have had good results in terms of an exit.
Is that also your perception?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I've been coming here for the last 7 or 8 years since Endeavor's had a presence, and I think there is more happening today and more potential and more opportunity for entrepreneurs in Istanbul today, and actually in this whole region, than there has ever been. And I think one of the pieces of building a startup ecosystem actually is role models, right? So having stories you can look to and say, you know, Endeavor's worked in Latin America for a long time. a company like Mercado Libre that is now a $6 billion market cap company listed on the NASDAQ that came out of Buenos Aires, people can say, wow, you can do that from Argentina? That's really cool. You know, if you look at this place, you know, a few years back you had Marcofonia and Gittigirior, you sort of had these two examples. Well, now you also have Positron, you have Yemek Sepeta, and you have literally dozens of other businesses on their way, you know, and I think that's a really, really exciting piece.
And you're seeing that virtuous circle where the entrepreneurs, after they've exited, are active in the ecosystem as investors, et cetera. So role models and that next wave of investors also. So very positive.
That maybe one way to measure it, you know, Endeavor's in 24 countries. We have offices in 53 different cities.
Yeah, you can feel that.
After Sao Paulo, Brazil, this is probably the #2 city where I'm spending time and our Silicon Valley team is spending time.
Yeah, that's a good parameter. Okay, thank you, everybody. I think the time we have is over, so thanks a lot for being with us. Thank you.